Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan. I've been practicing law for 25 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law, and I often write about this stuff for places like roadandtrack.com. Today we're going to talk about why it's not illegal for a car dealer to charge you too much for a car. A car dealer can charge you anything they want for a car, and it's not illegal for the most part, especially in Michigan. And the reason I'm doing a topic like this today, and again, most of my topics on Lehto's Law are ripped not from today's headlines, but ripped from the phone calls I get at my office every day. I get phone calls. Actually, if you combine emails and phone calls, I do get asked about this more than once a week. I'd say on average 2 to 3 times a week, where it goes something like this. Someone contacts me either by phone or email, and they say, Steve, I bought a car. Salesman said it was a great deal. I signed a document, I paid some money, I brought it home, and then I did some research, and I found out I got ripped off. And I've heard that this is true with new cars, and I've heard it with used cars. And what's kind of strange about this is that I don't know why anybody in a typical transaction on this planet would believe that the seller is being honest when they say, this is a good price. You should understand that in a capitalist society, okay, you've all heard the phrase buy low, sell high, that you would expect a seller to ask for a high price, okay, when they're trying to sell you something, and it's your job to pay a low price, okay? So this isn't that complicated, and yet for some odd reason, people say, well, I went to the dealership, and they told me that this was a good price for the car, so I paid it. Or it's somebody on Craigslist and they said this is the going price and I paid it. Or even a brand new car. They say, I went in and I found out they charged me, $10,000 over the MSRP. Well, when you're going to complain about the manufacturer's suggested retail price, I ask you to take those initials and deconstruct them and notice the S. It's suggested retail price, okay? So when Ford, GM, Chrysler, or what have you, take a vehicle and they sell it to a dealer, they suggest a retail price. And if you watch the television advertisements when they are talking about the new car that's on the road and how you should consider buying one because it'll make you sexy, look at all that fine print at the bottom of the ad that takes up about 3 yards of space on your big screen TV, and you can't read it because it's too small and it goes by too quickly. But in there it's buried and said this is a suggested retail price. Dealers can charge whatever the heck they want, okay? But it also happens with used cars. People just simply say, I bought a used car. A guy told me that, my Camry that I just bought was, $15,000 is a good price. I came home, my friends are laughing at me, and it turns out that Camry's blue book for $5,000 in that year in that condition. And the guy robbed me. I paid 3 times what the car was worth. Isn't that illegal? And of course, the answer to that is no, it's not illegal, okay? They can charge you anything they want, okay? And in fact, it's their job to charge you as much as they can, like I said before. And it's your job to pay as little as you can. So, this topic does pop up in the news from time to time, pricing of cars. One of my favorite stories was a few years back, a dealership not far from my office. When the new T-Birds came out. Remember when the new T-Birds came out? The modern T-Bird. It was a little tiny car. It was a very, very feminine car. And there was a guy who wanted one, and he went to the local Ford dealer and said, hey, I want to buy one of those cars the second they're available. Will you sell me one? And when you ask a car dealer, will you sell me something, if the answer is anything other than yes, you need to run, because that's their job, and if they won't sell you something, there's something drastically wrong. You're either on a game show, you're being punked, something's wrong if they won't sell you something. So the salesman says, sure, give us $1,000 down and we'll do a purchase agreement right now. So they write up a purchase agreement, everyone signs it, the guy hands him $1,000 and he leaves. And of course, with the frenzy that happened when those new T-Birds came out, they quickly realized that they could get a premium on the car. And this happens from time to time when a new car comes out. You can't go to a Dodge dealer and get a Hellcat at sticker. Okay, you just can't. The cars are so hot that there are more than enough buyers who want them that they're willing to pay a premium. And so the dealership quickly realized that they can get a premium on the T-Bird, so they call the guy back and they say, hey, dude, the purchase agreement you signed is not binding. If you want that T-Bird, you got to come back in and sign a new purchase agreement and agree to pay us another $10,000 or $20,000 bump as a premium. And of course, litigation ensued, and it's kind of funny because I actually knew the attorney who was defending the case. And I said to her, I'm just curious, what's your defense? Your client has a purchase agreement, which is signed by all parties, and it says, they're going to buy the car at this price, and now you're saying that the purchase agreement is not binding? And she said, no, it's not binding. It's an offer to purchase. And I go, wait a second. So you're telling me from now on, whenever I come into court with one of my clients against one of your clients, I can say the purchase agreements aren't binding contracts? And then she, of course, she backpedals. She goes, well, no, just in this one case. And that's a pet peeve of mine. I can't stand it in any profession, but especially lawyers who will simply take a position because it's convenient for them at that moment. And they don't understand that if you take a position on a particular topic, that you should be able to step back and ask yourself, well, what does this mean in the bigger picture? If we have a court rule, for instance, that a purchase agreement is not a binding contract, or what have you. I'm going to digress a little bit, tell you one of my favorite stories I've never told in this show before. That a few years ago, there was an attorney who represented one of the big three, and he always argued there was nothing wrong with the car. The purchaser was simply suffering from buyer's remorse. You could have a car where the engine blew up. You could have a car that caught on fire. You could have a car that killed people, and he'd say, there's nothing wrong with this car. This person simply can't afford the payments. They're suffering from buyer's remorse. And he had a canned template memo that he would write, and he'd stick that into every single brief he wrote, every single motion he filed, every single case evaluation summary he filed, for those of you in Michigan who know what that is. And it was just this canned thing that just said, buyer's remorse, buyer's remorse. And he would belittle any complaint someone had, and you'd say, so what the engine exploded? So what the car won't start? So what that it strands them by the side of the road? They're suffering from buyer's remorse. And I'd say, that's crazy. And he'd say, no, because they can just bring it back and we'll work on it. So one day we're making small talk in the hallway, and he turns to me and he goes, oh my God, you wouldn't believe the problem I'm having with my Lexus. Now he works for the big three. He bought a Lexus. And I looked at him and I go, what kind of a problem, pray tell, are you having with your Lexus? He goes, the reception on my car is bad when I'm driving through downtown Detroit. And I said, okay. And he goes, so I've already elevated this. I've threatened to sue them. I've been talking to their legal department. I go, about what? And he goes, I'm entitled to a buyback. I want my vehicle bought back. I go, well, what's wrong with it? And he looks at me like I'm not listening to him. And he goes, I told you, the radio reception's not good. I go, wait, dude. You just told me that your radio reception was spotty only when you're driving around the downtown area of Detroit, which is what he told me. There's one little 3 or 4 block area where the courthouse is. I go, he specifically told me that's where it happened. I go, outside of that area, your radio works fine? He goes, yeah. I go, and you want Lexus to buy your car back because of that? And he said, yeah, it's an expensive car. I go, dude, what about all my clients up till now who've had problems worse than that? And you've said that those are de minimis problems, buyer's remorse, and the manufacturer doesn't have to buy those cars back. And you're saying Lexus needs to buy your car back because you get spotty reception in a 5-block area in downtown Detroit. And he goes, I don't get what you're arguing. I go, do you honestly think that your spotty reception in a 5-block area in your car is worse than my client who's had an engine explode 5 times, or a car that won't start, or a car that strands them by the side of the road? And he goes, a Lexus costs more than those cars. And I said, wait a second. So where in the Lemon Law does it say this is based on the value of the car? And he looks at me and he goes, Steve, I don't even understand what you're arguing. I go, well, Jim, if I was defending Lexus, and let's assume Jim's not his real name. I said, Jim, if I'm defending Lexus, what I'm going to say to you is buyer's remorse. You can't afford this Lexus. And he goes, oh, that's silly. I can afford this. Obviously, I can afford it. You know I've got money. So anyways, that's a digression. But the point is that attorneys will often make these arguments where they will argue something on one day and argue the exact opposite the next day, seemingly oblivious to the fact that their positions are contrary to one another, which is logically inconsistent, and they shouldn't do that. But, okay, so the question is, if a car dealer charges you too much money for a car, is it illegal? And I've already told you, no, it's not. Now, in some states, it could be, just not Michigan. And Michigan used to have a thing called the Consumer Protection Act, where a seller could not charge you a price grossly in excess of the value of the goods at the time of the sale. So that law made sense because the point is, if something's worth $10,000 and I sell it to you for $50,000, there's probably something else going on, some kind of fraud or something going on. Someone's taking advantage of something, but generally speaking, there's something else going on. And the law was struck down by our Supreme Court in their infinite wisdom, and I'm being very facetious when I say that. And they've said that the law doesn't apply to anybody, basically. So in Michigan, you are allowed to sell stuff at a price grossly in excess of the value of the goods. Now, a lot of other states have similar laws that have not been struck down because they've got better and smarter Supreme Courts. So if you are in a state where it is illegal to sell a vehicle or any product for a price grossly in excess of the value of the goods, you might have a case if the person charges you a price grossly in excess of the value of the goods. The question then becomes, what is grossly in excess? Not in excess, but grossly in excess. And some states have actually said, well, it's got to be double or triple the price. So $10,000 car, if I sell it to you for $15,000, yeah, you got ripped off, but you can't sue me. $10,000 car, I sell it to you for $35,000, you could probably sue and possibly get some recovery for that, depending on the state you are in. And we've often heard of these stories, they make the news, where somebody, often they're disabled, they've got some kind of mental issues, they've got some kind of other disability that makes them incapable of protecting their own interests. And they'll go into a dealership and they'll spend $1 million in a car that costs $20,000, okay? I mean, there were stories like that. I've seen stories like that. And what's really going on there is not just that they're negotiating badly, it's just that the dealership is taking advantage of that person, okay? And in Michigan, for instance, let's suppose an elderly couple went into a dealership and the dealership somehow took advantage of the fact that this elderly couple couldn't protect their own interests. Perhaps they suffer from Alzheimer's or something. Then you could probably go after them on some other theories, okay? But it's really then hinging on the fact you're taking advantage of somebody's disability, not just that you overcharged them for the car, okay? Now, a lot of people who call me are of sound mind and sound body, and they simply say, hey, I bought this car, I trusted the salesman, and he lied to me when he said what the car was worth. Isn't that fraud? And people love the word fraud because they all know it's a bad thing, and it sounds good, but fraud is a very different animal. It's very, very difficult to prove, and fraud usually requires a seller to make a statement about the transaction, and the buyer's got to rely on the statement, but the statement's got to be objective in nature, and then it's got to be measurably and demonstrably false. And so if I say, hey, I think this car is worth $10,000 or $15,000, that's an opinion, obviously, okay? And that can't be the basis of fraud. So again, it's more important that you look at whether or not the person that's selling you the vehicle is taking advantage of you somehow. Now, I've actually gotten a lot of phone calls from people who say, Steve, I'm calling on behalf of my son or my daughter, okay? I've got a 18-year-old daughter who went car shopping by herself. She shouldn't have. And 3 salesmen sat her down and said, this is a good price for a car. They leaned on her hard, figuratively speaking, and she signed some documents, bought the car. She can't afford it, and it turns out she paid way too much, okay? And again, I say, well, what's your argument here? And they say, well, isn't that fraud? And I say, no, it's not fraud. I mean, if they coerced her into doing something, that's not fraud. The question simply becomes, was there anything illegal about the coercion? And we all know that high-pressure sales tactics exist, and it is a form of coercion, but you can get up and walk out. George Costanza taught us that in Seinfeld, okay? You can get up and walk, okay? So, I hope that when you go car shopping, number one, you should never shop alone. I don't care who you are. Never shop alone. If you have to, get a neighbor to go with you. Just get someone to go with you. If you have another body sitting next to you, okay, you can then have somebody with you who can be there to keep you from feeling outnumbered and all alone. And salespeople will lean on you less hard if there's someone with you. So never shop alone. But the most important thing you can do when you're car shopping, so as not to get ripped off, is to research the car before you buy it, preferably before you even go shopping, okay? So I know people go walk a car dealership lot, they see a car and they go, hey, that looks like an interesting car. Price looks good. And they do this in their head. okay? If you're going car shopping, hopefully you know what kind of car you're looking for, what make, model, and so on. If you don't, you need to narrow it down before you go, because what you do then is you look at prices, okay? So you're walking a car dealership lot, you're looking for a specific car, a specific year, make, model, all of that. You should know what the price range is, okay? If you don't, and here's the shocking part, there's a very good chance that your telephone, if it is smart enough, will allow you to log onto the internet, and there are dozens of websites that give prices of cars. If worse comes to worse, you can simply go to eBay, type in your zip code, the make, model of the car you're looking at, and ask it for prices of other cars in your area like it. And you can find other cars like this one in the area and see what they're selling for. And again, remember, these are asking prices. They might be high, but the point is, if this dealership wants $25,000 for a car, and you find 6 of them on eBay for $10,000, you know there's something amiss, okay? So the point is, you can do this research even as you stand there. I suspect that car dealers today hate seeing people walk around their lot looking at their smartphone, because they know they're doing research. And you can do research on your smartphone, and you need to do the research. Like I said, I'd prefer you do it at home in the comfort of your own home before you go shopping. But if you're driving down the road one day, or walking down the road, you haven't got a car. You're walking down the road one day and you see a car dealership and you decide to pull in, and all of a sudden a car just strikes your fancy and you say, I want to buy this car. Pull your phone out and do some research and figure out what the price ought to be before the salesman jumps on you. The salesman might jump on you quickly, but you have to say, excuse me, I'm checking my phone. Don't tell them why. If they say, what are you doing? You say, I'm playing Candy Crush. I'm in the middle of a really good game. Back off, dude. Give me 5 minutes. And then what you do is you very quickly find out other prices for the same make and model of car. And again, just to give you a ballpark, because the phone calls I get at my office are not from somebody who says, hey, the car was worth 10 and I spent 11. It's usually the car's worth 10 and I spent 20. Okay? So you should get the ballpark of where the numbers should fall. That's what you really need to know, and that's how you avoid getting ripped off. So again, it's not illegal for a car dealer to charge you too much for a car in most states, especially not in Michigan, unless you can prove that they took advantage of some disability or something. But generally speaking, it's not illegal for a car dealer to charge you too much for a car. And that's why a lawyer cannot help you after the fact. This is one you've got to just simply avoid doing in the first place. Any questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show's on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, sweeping the internet, and on YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.